The piercing wheel of a police siren tore through the quiet morning, then ended with a sickening crunch. I dropped my mug and bolted outside. There was the county sheriff's cruiser, crushed beneath the massive trunk of my oak tree. Smoke curled from the hood, and the blue light still flashed weakly under the weight of splintered wood. And standing beside the wreck, hands on her head, was Deborah Frost, our self-appointed HOA queen, the very same woman who had ordered that tree chopped down just hours earlier. Her pink blazer was dusted with sawdust and disbelief. I didn't have to say a word. The scene said everything. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of timing. That was the moment our little neighborhood feud turned from ridiculous to legendary. But before I tell you how an HOA president's arrogance spiraled into a full-blown scandal, drop a comment with your location and local time, and make sure to subscribe. You're not going to believe what came next. You'd think after a tree crushed a sheriff's cruiser, people would realize maybe, just maybe, messing with nature wasn't such a bright idea. But this story started long before that morning, back when the oak still stood tall in my backyard, and HOA President Deborah Frost still believed her clipboard could bend reality. When I first moved to Oakview Hills, I thought I'd found peace. I'm a landscape architect by trade, a man who spends his days designing parks, restoring wetlands, making things grow. That old oak had stood for nearly a century. Its roots sank deep into clay. Its branches shaded 3 backyards. It wasn't just a tree, it was history. It anchored the hillside, held the soil together, and kept the runoff from flooding Deborah's precious rose garden. I used to joke that the oak had been here longer than any HOA, and would outlive them all. That was before Deborah took office. If you've never lived under a real HOA dictator, let me paint you a picture. Blonde highlights just a little too sharp for her age, a closet full of pastel blazers bright enough to blind a camera lens, and a voice so shrill it could turn a block party into a courtroom hearing. And the badge. Oh, the badge. A laminated square that read HOA president. That was all the power she needed. The previous president, Mr. Grayson, was fair and reasonable. He believed in rules, but he also believed in logic. Deborah, on the other hand, believed in control. Within her first month, she banned basketball hoops, flagged mailboxes that weren't painted to prove shade of taupe, and even sent a written warning to a widow for owning a too cheerful wind chime. So I wasn't surprised when she finally turned her sights on my oak tree. It started one Tuesday morning with a letter taped to my front door, official HOA letterhead, printed in her signature Comic Sans. Violation notice. Unapproved vegetation structure. Section 3.4. Tree obstructs uniform sightline from curb and may impact property value. I laughed out loud. Unapproved vegetation structure? I thought it had to be a mistake. I walked across the street, letter in hand, to where she was watering petunias like she owned the county. Morning, Deborah, I said. Looks like there's been some mix-up. You sent me a violation notice for my oak. She squinted over her sunglasses like I just interrupted royal business. Not a mix-up, she said. That tree breaks a uniform elevation line from the road. We're standardizing the neighborhood's visual symmetry. Visual symmetry? I blinked. It's a 90-year-old oak, not a billboard. It blocks the view of the Frost residence, she said, gesturing toward her house like it was a national landmark. When prospective buyers drive through, first impressions matter. You planning to sell? I asked, smiling. Her eyes narrowed. That's not relevant. What is relevant is compliance. And that's when I realized this wasn't about the tree. It was about control. So I did what any rational adult would do when confronted by suburban tyranny. I documented everything. I took photos, called a county arborist, and pulled the original lot survey. That tree had been grandfathered in long before the HOA even existed. According to municipal code, it was protected under environmental conservation. The next day, I delivered a neatly stapled packet to her mailbox, complete with a certified letter explaining that the HOA had no jurisdiction over protected vegetation. I even highlighted the ordinance section, just to be polite. For a week, there was silence. I thought that was the end of it. Then she posted a photo of my backyard on the HOA Facebook group with a caption, "Unsightly overgrowth threatening property values. Let's discuss at the next meeting." Oh, the comments. You'd think I was harboring a swamp monster. Looks dangerous. Probably rotting inside. My allergies flare up every time I walk by. Funny thing, at least half of those people hadn't been within 20 feet of my fence. But in an HOA, perception is reality. And Deborah knew how to weaponize gossip better than any attorney could weaponize precedent. A few nights later, I saw her outside with a flashlight, pacing near my yard like a detective at a crime scene. I stepped out onto my porch. Need help finding your common sense? I called. She didn't answer, just scribbled something on her clipboard and vanished into the dark. The next morning, a second notice arrived. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in HOA action. That's when I knew things were about to escalate. I installed 2 new security cameras, one aimed at the oak, another at the side yard. I even added a little sign. Smile, Deborah. You're on camera. Petty? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. But Deborah wasn't the type to back down. When you threaten a Karen's illusion of power, she doubles down. 3 days later, I heard the low hum of chainsaws in the distance, not unusual for neighborhood, until I realized the sound was too close. I opened my blinds and froze. 2 men in orange safety vests stood by the base of my oak, ropes and saws in hand. And there she was, Deborah Frost herself, hands on her hips, barking orders like a foreman. I sprinted outside. What the hell do you think you're doing? The older worker looked uneasy. Ma'am said it's HOA-approved removal. Got the form right here. I turned to Deborah. You can't do this. You don't have the authority. She lifted her clipboard like a sword. Actually, Ethan, Section 5 allows emergency action to remove hazardous vegetation. That tree leans toward my property. It's a risk. Hazardous. I pointed to the trunk, sturdy as a pillar. You made that up. Her smirk could have curdled milk. Then sue me. For a second, I actually considered calling the cops right then and there. But something in her face stopped me. Her tone, so smug, so certain, told me I'd need more than words to stand against her. I needed proof. So I hit record on my phone and filmed everything. The workers, clearly uncomfortable, hesitated mid-step. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" one asked. "Yes," she snapped. "Cut it. Now." The chainsaws roared to life. My stomach turned. Every vibration rattled up through the soil into my chest as the blades bit deep into the bark. Branch by branch, the canopy that shaded generations came crashing down. By the time they were finished, the yard looked like a battlefield. Splintered limbs, torn roots, sawdust everywhere. And there stood Deborah Frost, proud and composed, like a knight standing over her slain dragon. I walked up beside her, calm, steady, though every muscle in my body trembled. "You just broke county law," I said quietly. She laughed, brushing sawdust from her pink blazer. "No, Ethan," she said with a smirk. "I saved the neighborhood." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked her straight in the eye. "Then I hope you kept the receipt," I said, because I knew exactly what would happen next. See, that oak's roots weren't just holding up the hill behind my house. They were holding up hers. Without them, that slope would turn to soup the moment heavy rain hit. And wouldn't you know it, the weather forecast showed a storm rolling in that weekend. So I got to work. I gathered every piece of evidence, the video, the contractor's info, the timestamps, even her smug little "then sue me." I was going to make this right. But the universe decided to move faster. That night, thunder rolled across the sky like distant laughter. Rain began tapping on my window, gentle at first, then harder, heavier. The ground outside darkened, soaking in every drop until it glistened under the porch light. By dawn, I realized the truth. When you pull out roots, literal or moral, the ground always gives way eventually. By Friday morning, it hadn't stopped raining for 12 hours straight. Gutters overflowed, the sky hung heavy and gray, and the soil behind our homes had turned into something between pudding and quicksand. I hadn't slept much. Every time thunder cracked, I could almost hear the empty patch of earth behind Deborah's yard sigh, relieve the roots that once held it steady. At 7 a.m., I threw on my raincoat and stepped outside with a thermos of coffee. The air smelled like wet clay and sawdust. My oak, or what was left of it, stood like a decapitated giant, its trunk split and hollowed. I crouched near the stump, brushing my fingers across the rings. 93 years old, according to the arborist report. Deborah had erased nearly a century in one afternoon of arrogance. Then I felt it. The ground squelched under my boots, shifting slightly with each step. I looked up and saw a thin crack running down the slope behind her property, stretching toward her patio. Not wide yet, but deep enough to whisper trouble. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and took several photos, time-stamped, geotagged. I knew I'd need them soon. At 9 sharp, my doorbell rang. Sheriff Brad Honland stood there, broad-shouldered, rain dripping from his hat brim, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He always carried that faint smell of cologne and entitlement. A longtime friend of Deborah's late husband, and an occasional guest at her wine nights. "Mornin', Ethan," he said, half friendly. "Got a report of a property dispute." "Yeah," I replied flatly. "You might want to talk to your friend across the street. She had my protected oak cut down." Brad rubbed his chin. "She claims it was a safety hazard." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and she's an arborist now." He gave that lazy shrug, the kind that says I've already picked a side. "You know how these HOA things go," he muttered. "Hard to tell what's private, what's common. Maybe let the civil court handle it." I stepped aside and motioned toward my yard. "Come take a look before you decide." He followed me, squinting through the rain. When he saw the stump and the long gash tearing through the hillside, his expression shifted. "That's quite a tree," he said quietly. I corrected. "And now that it's gone, that slope's unstable. Her property's one storm away from sliding right into mine." He frowned. "You threatening her, Ethan?" I almost laughed. "No," I said. "Nature is." He didn't like that answer. He took a few photos with his phone, muttered something about paperwork, and promised to mediate. Then he trudged off toward Deborah's house, where she was already waiting on her porch under a massive floral umbrella. I stayed just long enough to hear her voice rise over the storm. "He's making it up, Brad. The man's obsessed. He's filming me all the time." She was wrong about that last part, but I had my reasons. After they left, I spent the rest of the day organizing everything. The videos, photos, audio recordings. I even printed out the city's environmental protection code, highlighted in neon yellow. I wasn't letting this go. That night, I emailed the county environmental officer, Mark Dawson, attaching every file I had. Within an hour, he replied, "Thank you, Mr. Cole. This appears to be a violation of Section 8 to 213. I'll schedule a site inspection tomorrow morning." Finally, someone with sense. But Deborah Frost wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Around 11 p.m., headlights flickered through my curtains. I peeked outside. There she was, pacing in the rain, phone pressed to her ear, umbrella forgotten, her gestures frantic. She pointed toward my yard, toward the stump, toward the slope. The rain came harder. Thunder rolled. Then, somewhere in the distance, a loud crack. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. Down by the bottom of the hill, I saw it, the edge of a retaining wall, had split open like a cracked tooth. Chunks of stone scattered in the mud as water trickled through, carrying bits of soil and roots downhill. By morning, the crack had widened. Her patio tilted slightly toward my fence, one corner sinking into the softened ground. And there, sitting proudly in the middle of it all, was the sheriff's cruiser, parked exactly where it shouldn't have been. Turns out, Brad had come early that morning to check on things, and decided to park right beside the stump and wait for county inspector. The irony would have been poetic, if it wasn't about to get violent. At 8:42 a.m., my security cameras caught the environmental officer arriving in a white county truck. Clipboard in hand, he stepped out, shaking his head at the mess. Deborah stood on her patio, hair frizzed, face red, shouting over the storm. See? His tree's rotten roots caused this mess. Mark Dawson looked unimpressed. Ma'am, records show you ordered its removal. I did no such thing, she snapped. He turned his tablet toward her. I have footage from Mr. Cole's cameras. You were directing the contractors yourself. Her mouth opened, then closed. And that's when it happened. A low, deep groan rolled to the air. The ground shifted. The soaked slope behind her yard began to move. Slow, heavy, unstoppable. I could almost see it happening in slow motion. The sheriff's tone was smug, too confident for someone standing in the rain beside a crime scene. He told me I'd need evidence stronger than my word against Deborah's. So I hit record on my phone. I filmed everything. The workers, nervous and hesitant, glancing at each other. Ma'am, are you sure? One asked. Yes, she snapped. Cut it now. The chainsaw screamed to life. My stomach twisted. I could feel every vibration in the soil as the blade sank into the bark. Branch by branch, the canopy that shaded generations came crashing down. When it was over, the yard looked like a battlefield. Splintered wood, torn roots, and Deborah Frost standing triumphantly over the carnage like a knight who'd slain a dragon. I walked up beside her, calm, steady, though every muscle in my body shook. You just broke county law, I said. She laughed, brushing sawdust from her blazer. No, Ethan, I saved the neighborhood. I didn't yell, didn't threaten. I just looked her dead in the eye. Then I hope you kept the receipt. Because I knew exactly what would happen next. That oak's roots didn't just hold up the hill behind my property. They held up hers. Without them, the slope would turn to soup after the next storm. And wouldn't you know it, rain was in the forecast for the weekend. I gathered my evidence. The video, the contractor's info, the timestamps, even her smug little quote. Then sue me. And I intended to do just that. But the universe decided to act faster. That night, thunder rolled across the sky like distant laughter. Rain began to tap against my window, gentle at first, then heavier. The soil outside darkened, softening, shifting. By dawn, Deborah Frost was about to learn a brutal lesson. When you rip out roots, literal or moral, you better be ready for the ground to give way beneath you. By Friday morning, it had rained for 12 hours straight. The gutters overflowed. The sky sagged heavy and gray. The ground behind our houses had turned to pudding. I hadn't slept. Every time thunder cracked, I could almost hear that hillside groan, relieved of the roots that once held it steady. At sunrise, I stepped outside with a thermos of coffee. The air smelled of wet clay and sawdust. My oak, what was left of it, stood like a decapitated giant. 93 years old, the arborist said. Deborah had erased nearly a century in one afternoon of arrogance. Then I saw it. A hairline crack zigzagging down the slope behind her property. Not wide, but deep. A warning. I crouched, snapped photos, and logged everything. At 9, the doorbell rang. Sheriff Brad Honland stood there, rain dripping from his hat brim, smelling faintly of cologne and old favors. Deborah's friend. Of course. Morning, Ethan, he said, half smiling. Got a report of property damage. Yeah, I replied flatly. You might want to start with your friend across the street. She had my protected oak cut down. He rubbed his chin. She claims it was a safety hazard. Is she an arborist now? He gave me that lazy shrug lawmen use when they've already picked their side. You know how these HOA things go. Hard to tell what's private, what's common. Maybe let civil court handle it. I motioned toward the yard. Come take a look before you decide. When he saw the stump and the torn hillside, his face tightened. That's quite a tree. It was, I said. And now that it's gone, that slope's unstable. One more storm, and she'll own a mudslide. He frowned. You threatening her, Ethan? I nearly laughed. No, nature is. He didn't like that answer. He took a few photos, muttered something about paperwork, and trudged off toward Deborah's house, where she was already waiting, umbrella in hand, voice raised over the rain. He's making it up, Brad. The man's obsessed. She wasn't wrong about the filming part. I had my reasons. That night, I emailed the county environmental officer, Mark Dawson, every file I had, the footage, photos, recorded audio, everything. Within an hour, he replied, Thank you, Mr. Cole. This appears to be a violation of Section 8 to 213. I'll schedule a site inspection tomorrow. Finally, someone reasonable. But Deborah wasn't finished. Not even close. At 11 p.m., I saw headlights flicker outside. She was pacing the rain, phone to her ear, umbrella forgotten. She pointed toward my yard, then toward the slope, frantic, desperate. The rain poured harder. Then at midnight, crack. Something heavy split open in the distance. I grabbed my flashlight. Down by a retaining wall, chunks of stone had broken away. Water trickled from the gap, carrying soil and roots downhill. By morning, the crack had widened. Her patio tilted slightly, one corner sinking into the soft ground. And right in the middle of it all sat the sheriff's cruiser, Turns out Brad had come early that morning to check on things. He parked right beside the stump. The irony would have been poetic if it wasn't about to turn disastrous. At 8:42 a.m., Mark Doss arrived, clipboard in hand, raincoat soaked. Deborah was already on her patio, shouting through the downpour. See, his tree was rotten. It caused all this. Mark looked unimpressed. Ma'am, records show you ordered its removal. I did no such thing. He turned his tablet around. Then how do you explain this? The screen showed her, directing the contractors, pointing at the oak. Her mouth opened, then closed. And then it happened. A deep, groaning sound rolled through the air. The slope behind her yard shifted. Everyone turned. The remaining half of the oak trunk, soaked and loosened by rain, tilted forward, sliding, bouncing once, twice, then slammed into Sheriff's car with a deafening crash. Glass exploded. Metal screamed. The siren wailed for a second, then died in the mud. Mud splattered across everyone, Mark, the deputies, Deborah in her pink slippers. The scene froze. Only the rain hissed on metal, and the faint honk of the dying cruiser's horn. I stepped forward, camera in hand, recording. Guess the tree was a hazard after all, I said flatly. Brad turned, soaked and furious. This isn't funny, Ethan. Wasn't meant to be, I replied. Just justice. By noon, the place was a circus. Yellow tape, flashing lights, gawking neighbors. Someone posted the footage to the HOA Facebook group under the title, HOA President's Tree Disaster Crushes Sheriff's Car, Instant Karma. It hit 3,000 views in an hour. By afternoon, Mark Dawson pulled me aside. Mr. Cole, he said quietly, your footage shows everything. We'll file this as unlawful removal of protected vegetation and property damage due to negligence. It's serious. Serious enough for charges? I asked. He nodded. At minimum, heavy fines. Possibly civil liability. And given whose car that is, he glanced toward the flattened cruiser, someone's got explaining to do. Deborah overheard, her face collapsing faster than her hillside. Wait, Mark. I didn't know. The contractors. They said you gave the order, he cut in. On video. That night, as the rain finally stopped, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the flashing lights fade one by one. My oak stump stood dark and drenched in the backyard, surrounded by police tape. Somewhere across the street, Deborah's house went dark. The storm was over. Or so I thought. What came next would tear the HOA apart. Investigations, insurance claims, and a full-blown neighborhood scandal. Because when a Karen falls, she doesn't fall quietly. She takes the whole HOA down with her. By sunrise, the story had grown legs. Someone's teenager posted drone footage of the crushed cruiser to TikTok. Within hours, it hit 100,000 views under the hashtag HOA Karma. By the next morning, county trucks filled the street. Sheriff Brad stood in the mud, humiliated, trying to save face while his cruiser sat half buried behind police tape. Deborah emerged from her house, hair frizzed, face pale, voice trembling. Ethan, I hope you're happy. Your tree destroyed county property. Funny, I said, sipping my coffee. I thought your authorization destroyed my tree. Don't get smart, she hissed. You'll be hearing from the HOA's attorney. Oh, I already did, I said. He called this morning to ask if you'd officially lost your mind. Brad snapped. Enough. This is an active scene. He turned to me. Did you or did you not plant that tree legally? I raised an eyebrow. Sheriff, that oak's been here since your grandparents were kids. I've got survey maps from 1931 to prove it. Deborah crossed her arms. Well, maybe it was disease. Mark Dawson stepped forward, holding a clipboard and drone controller. Not diseased, he said. Healthy core. No rot. This was intentional removal. Deborah blinked. Intentional? Are you implying that you ordered it? He said flatly, pulling up the video, still of her pointing toward the tree. Her mouth opened, closed. Nothing came out. Brad stared at her. Deborah, you told me you had county approval. I thought I did, she snapped. Mark shook his head. HOA bylaws do not override county environmental law. You can just break HOA rules, ma'am. You broke state law. Silence fell, the kind that even the rain respected. Finally, Deborah spoke, her voice cracking. We can settle this quietly, right? Mark closed his clipboard. You'll appear before the county review board. You're liable for environmental fines and property restitution. The sheriff department will file their own report for vehicle damage. Deborah paled. Brad, they can't blame me for that, can they? He glared. That's my car, Deborah. You told me that stump was stable. I didn't know. Because I told you. I said calmly. Yesterday morning, you called me a liar. Brad's face had all realization and regret. By noon, news vans lined the street. A local reporter shoved a mic toward Deborah. Ma'am, is it true a protected oak tree caused this? No comment, she muttered. Then the reporter turned to me. Sir, are you the property owner? Guilty as charged, I said, though not as guilty as the one who cut it down. She smiled. Would you call this an example of HOA overreach? Oh, I call it case study. Chapter 1, How to Turn a Neighborhood Rulebook into a Weapon. By evening, it hit the local news, and I hit hero status. Neighbors messaged me laughing emojis, calling me the HOA Whistleblower of the Year. But deep down, I felt something else, a heavier truth. Because it shouldn't have taken a smashed cruiser to prove what was obvious from day one. Power unchecked always collapses under its own weight. Sheriff Hanlon showed up on my porch that night. Ethan, we need to talk, he said. I set down my beer. About your insurance deductible? He sighed. Look, I know Deborah went too far, but if you push this publicly, it'll get ugly. Lawsuits, politics, you name it. Sheriff, I said evenly. Ugly started when she trespassed on my property with chainsaws. I'm not the one who has to worry about optics. He studied me for a long time before muttering. You always were stubborn, and you always were partial to the wrong people. His lips pressed into a thin line. I'll file my report, but off the record. You didn't hear this from me. Her husband's old construction firm still has county contracts. This could get messy. I'm counting on it, I said. When he left, I walked back to the stump one more time. The moon broke through the clouds, silver light glinting off the splintered wood. It looked almost peaceful now, like the end of battle, quiet but not forgotten. I could hear frogs starting to sing again in the marsh beyond the hill. The air smelled of renewal, but also of warning, because even though the law was finally on my side, I knew Deborah wasn't done. She was too proud, too entitled, too obsessed with appearances to simply vanish in shame. Somewhere inside that mansion of hers, she was already scheming, calling lawyers, crafting narratives, rewriting history. People like her didn't apologize. They strategized, but I had patience. I had proof. And most importantly, I had momentum. By morning, Oakview Hills would no longer be hers to rule, because when the sheriff's car went down with that tree, it didn't just crush steel and glass. It crushed her credibility. And that, I knew, was only the beginning of her real downfall. The next few days in Oakview Hills felt like the calm between two storms. Only this time, the weather wasn't the problem. It was gossip. It spread faster than mold on wet drywall. Every neighbor, from the retired dentist on Birch Lane to the stay-at-home yoga influencer 2 doors down, had something to say about the tree incident. By Monday morning, I couldn't even step outside without someone pretending to walk their dog just to get a peek at the crushed patrol car still sitting behind yellow tape. I'd overhear fragments of conversation every time I took the trash out. Did you see Deborah's face on the news? I heard the sheriff tried to blame Ethan. No way. My cousin works at City Hall. She's toast. And in a rare moment of community unity, everyone agreed on one thing. Karma had perfect aim. But karma wasn't done yet. That morning, a county engineering crew arrived to assess the slope. 3 men in reflective vests and mudcake boots stood near the shattered stump, talking quietly. I wandered over, pretended to check my mailbox. One of them, a gray-haired man with a clipboard, looked up. You the homeowner? Yeah. What's the verdict? He sighed. Not good. Those roots were holding up 40 feet of soil. Without them, the whole back embankment's losing structure. The ground's saturated. If it rains again this week, that retaining wall's not going to hold. I glanced up toward Deborah's house, where a picture-perfect patio hung, precariously above the crack, like a stage built on stilts. And if it doesn't hold? He grimaced. Let's just say your HOA is going to need more than bylaws to fix it. By noon, the workers had installed measuring rods and sensors along the slope to monitor ground movement. I stood by my fence watching them work when Deborah came marching down her yard, umbrella in hand, face tight with fury. Excuse me, she barked. Who authorized this excavation? The foreman didn't even look up. County order, ma'am. Safety inspection. Well, I didn't approve it, she snapped. The man chuckled. Ma'am, you don't approve the laws of gravity either, but they still apply. I nearly choked trying not to laugh. She turned her glare on me next. You think this is funny, Ethan? Not at all, I said, raising my phone. Just documenting the miracle of consequences. Her nostrils flared. You're harassing me. I'm filming on my own property. I replied, but you're welcome to file another false report. Seems to be your hobby. She stormed off, muttering something about defamation. That evening, thunder rumbled again in the distance. Not a full storm, just teasing rumbles from the western sky. But after everything we'd been through, even the faintest thunder felt like a warning shot. Around 9 p.m., as I sat in my living room editing drone footage for evidence, I heard a faint crack. Not thunder this time. Something closer, sharper. Then another. I stepped outside with my flashlight. The slope behind Deborah's property was moving. Slowly, like a great creature shifting in its sleep. The retaining wall bowed outward, concrete splitting at the seams. And then, without ceremony, it gave up. The wall crumbled in a dull roar, pouring debris and mud down the hill. A wave of brown sludge surged across her backyard, swallowing garden furniture and potted plants. One of her white lawn chairs even surfed a mudslide for a good 30 feet before vanishing into the mess. I grabbed my camera again, filming every second. Water gushed to the broken slope, carrying soil, rocks, and shattered patio tiles. Her back deck tilted to one side like a sinking ship. And right in the middle of it all, perched at the base of the slope where the cruiser still sat, was Sheriff Hanlon again. I didn't even know he was back, but apparently, he'd been monitoring the situation. When I saw him through the sheets of rain, standing near the caution tape, my stomach dropped. Brad, move. I yelled from my porch. He turned just in time to see the second wave of mud break loose. It wasn't huge, but enough to send rocks and tree debris tumbling. One thick slab of trunk bounced down and slammed into the cruiser again. The impact knocked the car another few feet downhill, splattering mud up to the windows. Brad jumped aside, slipping into the muck, shouting curses that would have made a priest blush. From her deck, Deborah screamed, "Do something! Stop it!" As if anyone could stop gravity. The county engineers scrambled to higher ground. The sound of snapping roots echoed across the yard like gunfire. By the time it was over, the cruiser sat half buried, the slope carved open like a wound. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled, slowly, heavily. This wasn't just karma anymore. This was a full invoice coming due. The next morning, news vans returned, twice as many this time. One of them even brought a drone crew. Reporters swarmed the area like seagulls at a landfill. I stayed quiet, leaning on my fence while they interviewed the county inspector. Officials confirm. One reporter said into her mic that the unauthorized removal of a protected heritage tree directly caused this partial landslide, which resulted in property damage to both private and county assets. The HOA president, Mrs. Deborah Frost, could face civil penalties exceeding $50,000. That number hung in the air like perfume, sweet, sharp, and satisfying. Of course, Deborah wasn't going down without drama. When she saw the cameras, she stormed out onto her ruined deck, clutching a stack of papers and yelling, "This is harassment. That man is manipulating footage." I was acting under HOA authority. One of the reporters turned her mic toward Deborah. "Ma'am, your HOA's attorney says they have no record of such authorization." She froze mid-yell. The silence that followed was priceless. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hanlon stood off the side, mud still caked on his boots, expression somewhere between humiliation and exhaustion. He caught my eye briefly, then looked away. That evening, the county issued a formal notice declaring the slope a hazard zone. Deborah's backyard was officially condemned until further stabilization. The HOA's insurance refused to cover the damage, citing unauthorized environmental interference. In other words, she was on her own, and that's when the real collapse began. Not of soil, but of reputation. Neighbors who used to kiss her ring started avoiding eye contact. The HOA board called an emergency session. Whispers spread to the cul-de-sac about misused funds, fake maintenance invoices, even personal spending on community events that never happened. I didn't start those rumors, but I didn't stop them either. By the end of the week, the sheriff's department had officially filed a damage report naming Deborah Frost as the responsible party for the destruction of county property. The phrase reckless negligence appeared 3 times in the report. When I read it, I smiled for the first time in days. The next morning, as I left for work, I saw her standing by her mailbox in slippers, holding a letter. Her eyes were red. Her hands trembled. It was the official notice of liability from the county, plus a court summons. She saw me watching and snapped, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I walked up to the edge of my lawn and said quietly, "Not proud, just relieved." Then I pointed toward the stump behind me. Funny thing about trees, Deborah, you can't cut out roots without the ground remembering. Her lip quivered. For a split second, she looked human. Then she turned and went inside, slamming the door hard enough to echo across the street. That was the last time she spoke to me directly. But the fallout was far from over. Because as satisfying as it was to see justice finally land, I knew the next act in this neighborhood drama was about to get even messier. HOA elections, audits, and maybe, just maybe, a few buried secrets finally clawing their way to daylight. And for once, I wasn't the one digging. If you told me a month earlier that my backyard would become the scene of a county investigation, 3 insurance claims, and a viral YouTube clip titled, "HOA Karen vs. Gravity, She Lost," I would have laughed. But by week's end, Oakview Hills wasn't just gossip fodder. It was a full-blown legal circus. The county environmental office cordoned off the slope with fresh tape. The sheriff's department filed its official incident report, which listed the cause of damages, unauthorized removal of stabilized vegetation, resulting in structural collapse. Translation, Deborah's crusade had literally brought the hill down. And now, the insurance companies wanted blood. On Monday morning, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up, adjusters, lawyers, investigators. They set up folding tables under pop-up tents, pulling files from waterproof binders while drones hovered overhead, taking aerial shots of the carnage. You'd think they were filming a crime scene. In a way, they were. I watched from my porch, trying not to grin as one of the adjusters, an older man with silver hair and a permanent frown, walked up to me. "Mr. Cole," he said, flipping through his notes. "You're the property owner adjacent to the slope?" "That's right." He nodded. "We've reviewed the footage. I have to say, that video is one of the most comprehensive documentations I've ever seen. You should consider working for us." I smiled. "Thanks, but I prefer planting things to watching them fall apart." He chuckled, then gestured toward the ruined hillside. "You're aware Mrs. Frost submitted a counterclaim accusing you of negligence?" I snorted. "Negligence? For owning a tree that survived 9 decades before she decided to play lumberjack." He smiled politely. "We're not taking it seriously. Between your time-stamped footage, the county ordinance, and the contractor's statements, let's just say her story doesn't hold up." I leaned against the porch rail. "So what happens now?" He sighed, scanning the scene. "Her homeowner's insurance won't cover self-inflicted damage. The HOA's policy excludes unlawful activity. That means..." "Well," I said, "she's personally liable?" He nodded. "For all of it." "Personally liable," I repeated, letting the words sink like good music. "Yes, sir, including the sheriff's cruiser." I raised an eyebrow. Now that is poetic justice. Meanwhile, Deborah wasn't handling the spotlight well. The moment reporters stopped camping outside her house, she started filming herself. She uploaded a tearful Facebook Live rant titled, "The Truth They Don't Want to Know About Oakview Hills." In it, she wore sunglasses indoors and claimed she'd been sabotaged by vindictive neighbors spreading misinformation. She said I had manipulated drone footage, that I'd set her up, and that the tree had been unstable due to soil disease. The comment section was brutal. "Lady, you hired the crew yourself. The only disease here is HOA power trips. You're crying in your Range Rover, ma'am. Nobody's feeling sorry for you." Within an hour, she deleted the video, but not before someone downloaded it and re-uploaded it to Reddit under r/HOA stories. It hit 1.2 million views overnight. I should have felt vindicated. But what I felt was something else. Exhaustion, vindication, and peace aren't the same thing, I realized. Vindication's loud, peace is quiet, and my neighborhood hadn't been quiet in weeks. Still, the investigation pressed on. The contractors Deborah had hired, two brothers from a small landscaping company, were subpoenaed for statements. I happened to see them again one afternoon when county investigators arrived to record interviews. They looked nervous but relieved. One of them, Jake Morales, recognized me. "Hey man, sorry about your tree," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We told her we needed county clearance. She said she was a clearance." "She told me that too." I said, "At least you got on video." He nodded. "Yeah, we gave the footage to the county. My lawyer says it's open and shut." "Good," I said. "She's been getting away with this too long." As the investigation deepened, more skeletons began crawling out of the HOA's file cabinets. Turns out, Deborah's beautification fund was missing thousands of dollars in miscellaneous landscaping fees. A paper trail led straight to a contractor she'd personally approved, one who'd been billing for projects that didn't exist. When word hit the HOA board, it was chaos. I got the whole story from Patricia Lane, the assistant treasurer, a quiet widow who'd lived here longer than anyone. She showed up on my porch one evening, clutching a folder. "Ethan," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "you didn't hear this from me, but we did an emergency audit. The numbers don't add up. Deborah's been using HOA funds to pay for personal projects." "Personal projects?" I asked. Patricia nodded grimly. "Bathroom renovations, a new hot tub, even her lawn service." I let out a low whistle. Guess she believed in reinvesting in the community, her own community. Patricia almost smiled. "The board's voting tomorrow to suspend her authority. She doesn't know yet." The next evening, the HOA held a closed session in the community hall. But in Oakview Hills, nothing stays closed. Half the neighborhood crowded outside the glass doors as muffled shouting echoed from within. When the doors finally opened, Deborah stormed out, face blotchy and pale. A few board members followed, looking like they'd just survived an exorcism. Patricia emerged last and walked straight to me. "It's done," she whispered. "Unanimous vote. She's out." The news spread like wildfire. By nightfall, the group chat was filled with confetti emojis and gifs of falling trees. Someone even updated the HOA website banner from Oakview Hills, a harmony of order to Oakview Hills under new management. I slept better that night than I had in months. But Deborah? Not so much. The next morning, she tried one last act of desperation, filing a complaint with the county accusing me of environmental sabotage. She claimed I deliberately weakened the slope to frame her. The county officer forwarded the email to me with a note that simply read, "Nice try." 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy, one who wasn't Brad, served her with an official notice of civil penalties. The total damages, $63,400. That included restoration costs, environmental fines, and vehicle damage. The deputy, apparently a fan of irony, delivered the notice while standing beside the crushed cruiser still half buried in mud. When the paperwork hit her hands, Deborah went silent. No yelling, no excuses, just a quiet, defeated nod. That afternoon, movers arrived at her house. Not everything went, but the essentials did. Boxes, clothes, her dog. By evening, her beloved white Range Rover rolled out of the neighborhood, leaving deep tire marks in the wet asphalt. I stood at my gate and watched her go. For once, she didn't look angry, just hollow. I thought that would be the end of it. But Oakview Hills has a memory like wet cement. Everything that happens here leaves an imprint. A week later, the HOA held a community cleanup event. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now shook my hand. Someone even brought cookies shaped like trees. And for the first time in months, Oakview Hills felt quiet again. "Ethan, we need to talk," Sheriff Hanlon said, leaning on my porch rail. I set down my beer. "About your insurance deductible," he sighed. "Look, I know Deborah went too far, but if you push this publicly, it'll get ugly. Lawsuits, politics, you name it." "Sheriff," I said evenly, "ugly started when she trespassed on my property with chainsaws. I'm not the one who has to worry about optics." He studied me for a long time, then muttered, "You always were stubborn, and you always were partial to the wrong people." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll file my report, but off the record, you didn't hear it from me. Her husband's old construction firm still has county contracts. This could get messy." "I'm counting on it," I said, when he left. I walked back to the stump one more time. The moon broke through the clouds, silver light glinting off the splintered wood. It looked almost peaceful now, like the end of battle. Quiet but not forgotten. Frogs began to sing again in the marsh beyond the hill. The air smelled of renewal, but also warning. Because even though the law was finally on my side, I knew Deborah wasn't done. She was too proud, too entitled, too obsessed with appearances to simply vanish in shame. Somewhere inside that mansion of hers, she was already scheming, calling lawyers, crafting narratives, rewriting history. People like her didn't apologize. They strategized, but I had patience. I had proof. And most importantly, I had momentum. By morning, Oakview Hills would no longer be hers to rule. When the sheriff's car went down with that tree, it didn't just crush steel and glass. It crushed her credibility. That, I knew, was only the beginning of her downfall. The next few days in Oakview Hills felt like the calm between two storms. Only this time, the weather wasn't the problem. It was gossip. It spread faster than mold on wet drywall. Every neighbor from the retired dentist on Birch Lane to the stay-at-home yoga influencer 2 doors down had something to say about the tree incident. By Monday morning, I couldn't even step outside without someone pretending to walk their dog just to peek at the crushed patrol car behind yellow tape. I overheard fragments of conversation every time I took out the trash. Did you see Deborah's face on the news? I heard the sheriff try to blame Ethan. No way. My cousin works at City Hall. She's toast. And in a rare moment of unity, everyone agreed on one thing. Karma had perfect aim. That morning, a county engineering crew arrived to assess the slope. 3 men in reflective vests and mudcake boots stood near the shattered stump, talking quietly. I wandered over, pretending to check my mailbox. You the homeowner? One asked. Yeah. What's the verdict? He sighed. Not good. Those roots were holding up 40 feet of soil. Without them, the whole back embankment's losing structure. The ground's saturated. If it rains again this week, that retaining wall's not going to hold. I glanced up toward Deborah's house, where a picture-perfect patio hung precariously above the crack, like a stage built on stilts. And if it doesn't hold? He grimaced. Let's just say your HOA is going to need more than bylaws to fix it. By noon, workers had installed measuring rods and sensors along the slope. I stood by my fence, watching them work, when Deborah came marching down, umbrella in hand, face tight with fury. Excuse me, she barked. Who authorized this excavation? The foreman didn't even look up. County order, ma'am. Safety inspection. Well, I didn't approve it. The man chuckled. Ma'am, you don't approve the laws of gravity either, but they still apply. I nearly choked trying not to laugh. She turned her glare on me next. You think this is funny, Ethan? Not all, I said, raising my phone. Just documenting the miracle of consequences. Her nostrils flared. You're harassing me. I'm filming on my own property, but you're welcome to file another false report. Seems to be your hobby. She stormed off, muttering something about defamation. That evening, thunder rumbled again in the distance. Not a full storm, just teasing growls in the western sky. But after everything we'd been through, even faint thunder felt like a warning shot. Around 9 p.m., as I sat editing drone footage for evidence, I heard a faint crack. Not thunder this time. Something closer, sharper, then another. I stepped outside with my flashlight. The slope behind Deborah's property was moving, slowly, like a great creature shifting in its sleep. The retaining wall bowed outward, concrete splitting at the seams. And then, without ceremony, it gave up. The wall crumbled in a dull roar, pouring debris and mud down the hill. A wave of brown sludge surged across her backyard, swallowing garden furniture and potted plants. One of her white lawn chairs even surfed a mudslide for a good 30 feet before vanishing into the mess. I grabbed my camera again, filming every second. Water gushed to the broken slope, carrying soil, rocks, and shattered patio tiles. Her back deck tilted like a sinking ship, and right in the middle of it all, perched at the base of the slope, where the cruiser still sat, was Sheriff Hamlin. Brad, move. I yelled. He turned just in time to see the second wave of mud break loose. A thick slab of trunk bounced down and slammed into the cruiser again, knocking it several feet downhill, splattering mud up to the windows. Brad jumped aside, slipping in the muck, shouting curses that would have made a priest blush. From her deck, Deborah screamed, "Do something! Stop it!" As if anyone could stop gravity. By the time it was over, the cruiser sat half buried, the slope carved open like a wound. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled slowly. This wasn't just karma anymore. This was a full invoice coming due. The next morning, news vans returned, twice as many this time. One even brought a drone crew. Reporters swarmed the area like seagulls at a landfill. Officials confirm, one reporter said into her mic, that the unauthorized removal of protected heritage tree directly caused this partial landslide resulting in property damage to both private and county assets. The HOA president, Mrs. Deborah Frost, could face civil penalties exceeding $50,000. That number hung in the air like perfume, sweet, sharp, and satisfying. Of course, Deborah wasn't going down without drama. When she saw the cameras, she stormed out onto her ruined deck, clutching papers and yelling, "This is harassment! That man is manipulating footage." I was acting under HOA authority. One of the reporters turned her mic toward Deborah. "Ma'am, your HOA's attorney says they have no record of such authorization." She froze mid-yell. The silence that followed was priceless. That evening, the county issued a formal notice declaring the slope a hazard zone. Deborah's backyard was condemned until further stabilization. The HOA's insurance refused to cover the damage, citing unauthorized environmental interference. In other words, she was on her own, and that's when the real collapse began. Not of soil, but of reputation. Neighbors who used to kiss her ring started avoiding eye contact. The HOA board called an emergency session. Whispers spread to the cul-de-sac about misused funds, fake maintenance invoices, even personal spending on community events that never happened. By the end of the week, the sheriff's department filed a damage report naming Deborah Frost as responsible for destruction of county property. The phrase reckless negligence appeared 3 times. When I read it, I smiled for the first time in days. The next morning, I saw her standing by her mailbox in slippers, holding a letter. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling, an official notice of liability from the county, plus a court summons. She saw me watching. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she snapped. "Not proud," I said quietly. "Just relieved." Then I pointed toward the stump behind me. "Funny thing about trees, Deborah, you can't cut out roots without the ground remembering." Her lip quivered. For a split second, she looked human. Then she slammed her door. That was the last time she spoke to me directly. But the fallout was far from over. The new interim president, Patricia, approached me with a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, She smiled. The board voted to name the new replanting initiative after your oak. We're calling it the Coal Tree Fund. The county is even donating 2 saplings for restoration. I opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note, handwritten, for the man who stood his ground when the ground itself gave way. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't bitterness, just quiet satisfaction. I looked out over the muddy slope where the roots once anchored the earth and realized something. Deborah had built her empire on control. But control isn't the same as stability. Control snaps under pressure. Stability bends and endures. When you tear out the roots, you lose both. I took a deep breath. The smell of wet soil and pine filling the air. For the first time since the chainsaw started, I finally felt at peace. The storm was over. But the lesson had only just begun. I thought it was all behind me, that Deborah's Range Rover vanishing down County Road 47 would mark the quiet end of the saga. But HOA stories never end cleanly, do they? They crawl through every legal crack and gossip channel, like roots through concrete. A week later, I received a thick envelope from the county courthouse. Inside was a formal notice, Cole versus Frost. Deborah had filed a counterclaim, defamation, emotional distress, and property sabotage. I actually laughed out loud. Property sabotage? From the woman who ordered the chainsaws herself? I called my lawyer, Jim Sutton. No-nonsense guy. Silver hair, permanent smirk. Handled half the land disputes in our county. Congratulations, Jim said when I explained. You officially reached HOA endgame. Is that a legal term? I asked. It is now, he said, flipping to paperwork. She's bluffing. We'll countersue for full restitution and punitive damages. If she wants to fight, we'll give her one, in the open. And that's how my quiet suburban feud turned into a courtroom drama. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning, and the entire neighborhood knew it. Patricia texted me. Half of Oak View Hills is taking the morning off work. I showed up in my best Navy suit, pressed professional, and paired with the calm smile of a man holding irrefutable evidence. Deborah arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a beige trench coat and oversized sunglasses, as if anonymity could save her from notoriety. Her attorney, young, nervous, sweating, kept whispering to her like someone trying to defuse a bomb. The judge, Honorable Sarah Whitfield, took one look at the case file and sighed like she'd seen this play out 100 times. All right, folks, she said, adjusting her glasses. Let's see who chopped down what. Jim presented our case like a surgeon. Precise, calm, devastating. Photos of the oak in its prime. Certified protection documents. Footage of Deborah giving the order to cut it down. Then came the aftermath, the collapse, the mudslide, the crushed cruiser, the county fines, the HOA audit. When the video clip of her saying, "Then sue me," played in court, even the stenographer tried not to laugh. Deborah's defense was paper thin. She claimed she'd been misled by contractors and that I had provoked hostility. Her lawyer tried to argue I'd weaponized social media. Judge Whitfield leaned forward. Ma'am, did you or did you not authorize the removal of the tree? Deborah hesitated. I might have given verbal direction. So you did, the judge interrupted. And you were aware of county regulations? I was under the impression HOA bylaws superseded county code, Deborah said meekly. Jim smirked. That's not how laws work, Your Honor. The courtroom chuckled. When it was over, the judge didn't even need time to deliberate. Mrs. Frost, she said, sharp as a gavel strike, you are solely responsible for the unauthorized removal of protected property, resulting in environmental and structural damage. You will compensate Mr. Cole in the amount of $8,500 plus legal costs. Furthermore, you are prohibited from contacting him or entering his property for 12 months. Silence. Just a faint shuffle of Deborah gathering her papers, her sunglasses hiding nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just nodded politely as she passed, because deep down I knew her real punishment wasn't a fine. It was humiliation. And in an HOA, reputation is currency. When we stepped out into the sunlight, Jim clapped my shoulder. You handle that with class. I've seen people go nuclear in these cases. I figured she'd implode without my help, I said. He laughed. Fair enough. Go plant something, Cole. You've earned it. And that's exactly what I did. 2 weeks later, the county restoration crew arrived with a new oak sapling. 6 feet tall, sturdy, its roots wrapped in burlap. I used part of the restitution money to reinforce the slope with stone terraces and fresh soil. We planted it in the exact spot where its ancestor had stood. When we finished, Patricia and a few neighbors gathered to watch. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else handed me a small plaque. It read, "The Coal Oak. May its roots remind us that truth stands tall." I knelt, pressed it into the soil, and felt something settle in my chest. Closure, maybe? Or peace. But Oak View Hills wasn't done cleaning house. Rumors have been swirling about Deborah's embezzlement. A private maintenance fund. A mysterious HOA debit card used at a luxury salon. At the next emergency board meeting, Patricia stood before a packed hall. It's confirmed, she said. Former President Frost redirected over $60,000 in HOA funds for personal use. Gasps rippled through the room. Patricia continued. She'll face a separate criminal investigation for misappropriation of community funds. The room broke into applause. In the back, Richard Frost, her husband and former treasurer, stood up. His face was pale. I didn't know, he said quietly. Patricia nodded sympathetically. We understand, Richard, but the board must move forward. He sighed, shoulders heavy. Then I resign. And he walked out. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter, like the air itself had finally cleared. I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, passing the young oak standing proud in my yard. The night breeze rustled its leaves, soft, alive, forgiving. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy stopped by. Not Hanlon. He'd resigned after an internal review found bias in his case handling. This was Deputy Morrison, calm and kind-faced. "Just wanted to let you know," he said. "The county finalized your restitution. You'll get a check in 2 weeks. And good work keeping records. Most folks don't document anything until it's too late." "Thanks," I said. "I learned it the hard way." He smiled. "Seems like half the county learned something from your story." After he left, I looked toward Deborah's old house. Dark, empty, for sale signs swaying in the wind. The lawn had gone wild without her obsessive pruning. A perfect metaphor if there ever was one. For months, I'd seen that tree as a symbol of loss. Now it was something else. Proof that truth, patience, and stubbornness run deeper than control or vanity. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with sirens or gavels. Sometimes it falls from the sky, like a tree landing on the right person's mistakes. That night, I poured a glass of bourbon and raised it toward the sapling outside. "To the oak that taught me how to stand tall," I said quietly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel anger, just peace. The next morning, no HOA flyers, no pink memos. Only birds that rustled my oak in the spring wind. 3 months had passed since the court ruling. The grass was thick and green again. Ironically, the slope behind my yard, rebuilt with Deborah's restitution, was sturdier than ever. Neighbors stopped by often now, not complain but to talk. Patricia even brought me a bronze plaque that read, "Roots run deeper than rules." We mounted it by the base of the new oak as sunset light turned the bronze to gold. Then one day I got a letter. The return address stopped me cold. Deborah Frost, County Correctional Division. Inside, a single handwritten page. "Ethan, you won. Congratulations." Maybe I deserve the blame, maybe not. Power is addictive. It makes you think you're protecting order, when really you're protecting ego. I mistook control for respect. You reminded me what the difference looks like, Deborah. I sat there for a long time, conflicted. For months, I'd imagined her downfall with grim satisfaction. But reading that, seeing her handwriting, it hit different. Vindication was cold. Closure, though, that was warm. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the HOA bylaws binder she once weaponized. A perfect burial spot. Life moved on. Patricia's leadership transformed the HOA. Meetings became potlucks. The first event, Oak View Replanting Day, filled the neighborhood with laughter instead of tension. Someone even joked that the new motto should be "No chainsaws allowed." One board member asked if I'd ever run for president. I laughed. "No thanks. I've seen what that throne does to people." He smiled. "Maybe that's exactly why you should." I shook my head. "I'll stick to my trees. They listen better." As weeks passed, the new oak grew fast, stronger than I expected. Birds nested again. The soil smelled alive. Every morning, I stood by the fence with my coffee and felt like the world had finally realigned. Then one quiet Sunday, a white sedan pulled up across the street. A woman stepped out, jeans, gray hoodie, short hair. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Then I did. Deborah. She didn't come closer, just stood by her old mailbox, staring at the for sale sign. After a long pause, she looked up and met my eyes. No words, no shouting, just a quiet nod, an unspoken truce. I returned it. She got back in her car and drove away down County Road 47 until her taillights disappeared behind the trees. That evening, I sat under the oak, watching the sunset pour gold through its leaves. The neighborhood was peaceful again, and I realized this story was never about revenge. It was about growth, because patience beats rage. You can't out-yell arrogance, but you can outlast it. People like Deborah think control is power, but real power is calm, persistence, truth, and integrity that refuses to bend. When someone tries to cut you down, let your roots, your evidence, your patience, your faith speak for you, because truth doesn't fall. It waits, it weathers, and eventually it grows back stronger.